I Barely Got Here is a collection of stories and conversations based on 24 years in law enforcement. You have the right to be disturbed by some of the content or disagree with the viewpoints. Anything you hear can and will be dosed with sarcasm and dark humor. You have the right to know the discussions will often be graphic with language and themes that are intended for a mature audience. Do you understand your rights? Then buckle up, Buttercup. We're going 10-8. Hello and welcome back for another episode of I Barely Got Here. I'm your host, Kevin Booncher. Tonight's episode, what you doing with that chair? I was working as a patrol officer. I had a really good shift and had a good squad of other officers and a good squad sergeant, and things were going really well for me. I enjoyed the work that I was doing. I enjoyed the people that I worked with, and pretty much everything was just falling into place really well at that time. I was also doing instruction in a number of things, primarily firearms and defensive tactics, which gave you a nice break from kind of the regular shift and the regular grind. And I also really enjoyed it because you were helping newer officers and current officers learn and improve their skills. And you could watch, as especially the newer people, you'd watch their self-confidence grow, and really took a lot of satisfaction from that. At the time, I had about 11 years in. My position on the SWAT team was going well. I'd been on there for about 6 years, and I felt really good about all of that with regard to, again, my position, my experience, the work that we were doing, how things were going, the supervisors of the team, all of that. So basically what I'm trying to say is that things were going really well. It was a good time for me. And it was about this time that I also started to contemplate the decision to promote to sergeant. I felt, I had enough experience and tenure and time in at that point in my career. So it was afternoon. It was right before Halloween, so it was perfect weather for Phoenix. And I was working my usual beat in the north part of our city. Been a pretty easy shift so far up to that point. I get a call for dispatch, and they send me to a complaint about some parents that are having trouble with their kid. Immediately, you kind of think this is maybe a domestic violence. You just really don't know. Dispatch hadn't been able to get very much information from them at all. And on the DV call or domestic violence call, it's pretty customary to send 2 officers just for the potential for violence or anything else to go wrong. But as is often the case, there were no other people available. So as we often had to do, you just basically say, well, I'll go ahead and roll on that, and then I'll advise. Meaning I'll advise if I got it, or I'll advise that, oh crap, send us some help. And then to be honest, sometimes you could really ask any cop and they'd probably give you the same answer. But sometimes depending on who may or may not be available, or, working those sister or brother squads that are nearby you, you might really want to go by yourself to the call anyway. And when I say that, the reason I say it is because obviously, as with any other occupation, there's officers that aren't so great and some of them that are terrible. And those are the ones that you kind of wanted to stay away from. So if that was going to be what your backup was, then oftentimes you're probably better off without them. Because all they do is they bring a belt with a whole bunch of tools and implements of destruction on there that somebody else could use if things get crazy. More likely the case was you'd go on a call, and these people would be the first ones to just jack people up and get them all fired up. And then the next thing you know, you're rolling in the dirt with them and thinking, where did this thing take a south turn? The other problem with the DV call like this that we hated, cops really hated, is that sometimes these parents will call and they basically want us to come there and, threaten their kid to be good. And they would, almost do it right in front of you, where they would say, you know what, if you're not good, we're going to have the police take you away and, do X, Y, and Z or whatever. And again, we hate that. We absolutely hated it. And it's kind of obvious why the problem is. It's a terrible stigma to create for this kid. They essentially learn how to fear the police, and then they only see them in a negative light, of which, unfortunately, in this day and age, I think that we're seeing a lot of the repercussions from some of this behavior. And usually on the parent side of it, they're not doing the greatest job to begin with. Maybe a single-parent house, which makes things more difficult all around, regardless. And quite frankly, it's an easy way for a lazy parent to try to get their kid to straighten out. But, the bottom line is it's a terrible way to parent. So the call's in an apartment complex on the bottom floor, I remember, and I get in there and I find the right building and I get parked. And as I'm walking up to the apartment, I'm listening for any indications of a fight or yelling or windows being broken, or, people in the complex, oftentimes if there's something going on, they'll be outside and kind of like pointing you in the right direction to get you there. I'm not getting anything at all. Dispatch has no further info either. And so I basically, you walk up to the door. So I went up to the door and knocked on the door. A woman answers the door, and turns out to be the mom. And I quickly determined that there's really nothing going on. And by that, I mean, I'm not hearing anything. I'm not hearing any yelling or banging or slamming or things breaking. I'm not seeing anything as I'm looking past her and into the apartment. I don't see any chairs overturned or things that are broken, anything that's really given me any cause for concern. She has no visible signs of injury. She's calm. I don't see any, a lot of times you'll see that fear or that anxiety in their eyes that there's something wrong, but I'm not seeing any of that. So that's a good thing. So she invites me in, and I'm kind of asking her, hey, what's going on? And right away, I kind of get the impression that she almost just seems bored with what's going on or what isn't going on, and the fact that I'm even here, which again kind of just lowers my fear that there's anything serious or going on, and that I may or may not need to call anybody to back me up on the call. So off to the side, I kind of see a man that turns out to be the father, and it's the same thing. He just barely even pays me any attention. Kind of looks up and gives me a nod, but then he just turns right back to watching whatever TV show he's watching. So I'm thinking, well, this is a little strange. So again, I asked the mom, I says, well, what's going on? And in kind of the most monotone possible way, she basically says, well, our son is threatening to kill himself. So of course, automatically I'm thinking, well, okay, there is something going on here. What is going on? And, I have a million questions, but the biggest thing is I'm thinking, okay, where is he? And she essentially kind of gives a nod with her head back toward the hallway of the apartment. So now I'm like, okay, well, we got a problem inside the apartment. The parents don't seem super confused though. So I'm just still not, my anxiety hasn't peaked up too much yet at this point. So I walk around the hallway in the corner, and I look into the first open doorway of a bedroom. And when I look in there, I basically see this kid sitting on a bed, and he's holding like an 8 or 10 inch kitchen knife, which, okay, something's wrong with this picture. He looks like he's maybe 14 years old, just kind of an average teen looking kid. And he looks up at me, and he sees me. And I think he had heard me talking outside or whatever, so he knew it was there. And he just kind of holds the knife up in front of him. A little creepy, but still not a lot of time to overanalyze the thing. So at this point, things have to start to come together, and I'm probably about 10 feet away from this kid. So the very first thing that I have to contemplate is the fact that, okay, if this kid gets up and lunges at me, I'm going to end up having to shoot him. I mean, I really won't have any other choice. Then again, from training and experience, I know that a knife, especially a knife that big, even in the hands of a child, can kill you. So don't know what his mindset is, don't know exactly what's going on still, but I have to figure something out real quick, because in the back of my mind, I'm really thinking, I really don't want to have to shoot and kill this 14, 15-year-old boy. And the other issue for me that I thought as well was the fact that, again, suicide by cop is a commonly discussed and commonly understood issue now, but back then I don't think it was quite as, maybe not discussed in the open. We kind of knew that things happen that way, but that was my other consideration was, here's this kid's out. If he can't do the deed himself, essentially, here I am to help him facilitate, which unfortunately is one of the things that a lot of these people will do, that they want to kill themselves. They want someone else to kind of do it for them, which unfortunately often falls into the hands of the police. And he didn't say very much at all. He just kind of had held up that knife and kept staring at me, and which is kind of creepy. And so anyway, so the wheels are spinning, the half a second or a second is ticked by. And I have to say that, I had made that decision, as you often have to do when you're in a situation like that as the police, that, okay, if he stands up from the bed and he starts to come at me, I will have to shoot him. I really don't have any other way to stop him that's relatively safe or a sure way to stop him. And that's a decision that had to be made. And the other issue is I couldn't really retreat. I couldn't leave, because then that would give him an opportunity to come into the rest of the apartment and potentially injure or kill one of his family. So I just had no choice. I didn't see and I didn't feel like he was going to do something like that, especially with the parents being so calm and just really again, I just can't use any other word but bored with the situation. But, you can't rely on that assumption either. So again, right after I had said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. If this happens, what you do a lot in police work. If this happens, I do this. If this happens, I do that. It occurred to me that, I had just passed the dining room table, which was maybe 2 steps back out of the hallway. So I kind of, try to do it as quickly as possible. And it was maybe a second, 2 seconds. I kind of jump those 2 steps back. I grab one of those chairs, the closest one from the dining room table, and then I step right back into the open doorway of the bedroom. I step there and I have the chair in front of me and I stop and I'm just kind of standing there blocking it. And, I kind of startle this kid a little bit. And he's like, "What you doing with that chair?" Which is still kind of funny because, here's a kid that's threatening suicide and I really haven't even had a chance to talk to him yet. But, the first thing he really says to me of any relevance is, "What you doing with the chair?" But anyway, so the thought process was, and what I told him was, well, here's the deal. You've got that knife and I don't know what's going on and I'm not sure what you plan to do. I don't want you to hurt anybody. I said, but normally a police officer, if they're in this situation and you come at them with a knife, well, I would have to shoot you and I really don't want to do that. So what's going to happen is if you come at me with that knife, I am going to knock you across the room with this chair. I said, it'll probably break your bones, but you know what? At least I won't have to kill you. And so he gets kind of a sad or, I don't know, disgusted look on his face, which was kind of funny. He obviously wasn't happy with the explanation, but, the further that is, it's okay. Well, it's okay if you're thinking you're going to kill yourself or have me kill you, but you don't dig the idea of being smacked with a chair and having some bones broken and being in some pain that way. But again, odd situation. And while we're on that topic of suicide, there's a couple things I wanted to bring up. First, it's not illegal to kill yourself. And I know that seems logical and it seems to make sense. But, when you bring this up as a topic of conversation or in a group, there are people that will think, if you throw the question out without giving them much time to think about it, they'll say, yeah, they'll kind of blurt that out and say, yeah, it is illegal to kill yourself. Well, obviously it's not. It's not a crime. And again, what are you going to do if the person does it anyway, right? You're going to charge a corpse. You can't do anything about it. So it's a funny thing, but people will think that. But again, no charge, no crime. You're free to do with your body what you want. And the second follow to the suicide thing is that, if someone really wants to kill themselves, they will have already done it. They don't need witnesses, typically. Sometimes they do. The real nasty ones sometimes want someone to see them do it just so they can cause them some mental anguish. But the majority of people who have made that decision and they're committed to doing it, they will do it. They don't have to do it with a specific implement, a firearm or knife or anything else. They will get it done. And, again, I could go into all the different ways that people have killed themselves, but it doesn't matter. If they're going to do it, they're going to do it. And as is kind of commonly understood now, in most cases, when you do receive that suicide call, the threat, more times than not, it's that cry for help. It's somebody that, whether they truly intend to do it or they just have, feel like they have no other options, that's the call. They want to kill themselves and they call, and I don't know what the exact thought would be in the back of their head, but, maybe someone should talk me out of this, or I don't know. I'm not sure. Or sometimes maybe they want to talk to somebody before they finish. I really don't know. Not my area of expertise. And, I'll admit, as a lot of police, you go to calls like this, and unfortunately there are a lot of suicides. I don't agree with it, but it is what it is. I mean, if an adult wants to kill themselves and take their life, I don't get it. But at the same time, I'm not going to, I guess I'm not going to judge them. I don't think it's right. And the further to this is for public safety. You can't and you shouldn't risk an officer and or other public safety personnel in the attempt to stop them from doing this. I've seen a number of situations where usually cops will put them in a really bad position in the event that person decides, hey, you know what, instead of taking myself out, I'm going to take out somebody with me and or just take them out, period, because they got mental health problems. You just don't know. So, an example of this would be like a freeway jumper. You get these freeway jumpers, they're threatening to jump off the freeway. And again, typically, if they're committed and they're going to do it, you just get there to clean up the mess. They would have done it. They don't need witnesses. They don't need anybody to help them. They're going to do it. So you get the one that is just, for whatever reason, hasn't committed, hasn't followed through. Cops or firemen will go up there and they try to grab them or do all these other things, and they're not tied off. And, essentially they're basically risking their lives unnecessarily to try to get that person off the ledge, so to speak. That's the same thing with, somebody's got a firearm, they've got an edged weapon. They have something else that's essentially that implement that's going to help them kill themselves. And cops and or firemen will get just way too close to these people to where if the person decided to act out or take out their aggression on somebody else, the chances are really good that they're going to get hurt themselves. So again, not a crime. It is just not something that public safety should risk themselves to deal with unnecessarily. Obviously, we risk ourselves every call that we go on to some point, and there's safer ways to do it, but we don't want to do it unnecessarily. And there may be people that don't agree with this, and of course, they see these miraculous saves on television and movies and things like this where we do all these great crazy things and we grab people or we swoop in on a rope and save people at the last second. But it just typically doesn't work that way. And again, it's just another battle you have to deal with those perceptions. And you pose the question to somebody, or we pose the question in training, and you essentially say, what is it worth? You always have to have a risk versus reward. So if you're going to try to save this person from themselves, essentially, and there's no crime committed, you're not there to do anything related to law enforcement. What is it worth? And then you pose the question to the people that typically are the ones that are screaming the most and say, hey, is it worth unnecessarily risking your life? How would your family or friends feel about that? You're gambling a lot on the reward there, but you're risking too much. Sometimes you get people to understand it and sometimes you don't, but it is what it is. But anyway, back to this kid. So again, as with many situations, you're talking about a kid. And I hadn't seen or dealt with many, I don't think I've ever dealt with somebody that was this young that was threatening suicide, to be honest, that was really this close. You would hear people say it, talk about it, or things like that. But this is the first one that I dealt with up close and personal, and the only one, thank goodness. Even though he is a kid, I'm not willing to die for his sake either. I mean, he's made choices and things are the way they are, but that's not something that I'm willing to risk my life, again, unnecessarily for, which led me to this chair, which I thought was a great compromise. And you could be second guessed on it. I'm sure that there's some cops out there that would look at this and say, you know what, that's not correct. Lethal force is met with lethal force, period, for the most part, especially considering the proximity and the closeness, and I was the only one there, and on and on. And I totally get it, especially based on my own instructional experience of dealing with things just like this. I would also question this technique. It's kind of the same as we talk about shooting somebody in the leg or an arm to try to stop from what they're doing, shoot them to knock a gun out of their hand or just to injure them, which we would never, ever tell anyone to do. We don't teach firearms in that fashion. You teach firearms with you shoot somebody until they stop doing whatever it is that made you have to shoot them in the first place, whether it's 1 round or 10. But I have to say that, while it's not something we would ever teach and I would never tell anyone else to do, depending on the situation, I can't say that I wouldn't try something like that either. Never did, never came up in my career, but, it's kind of that never say never thing. There's a few incidents over the course of my career where I would say they're kind of like this, and I was able to use non-lethal, unconventional techniques to bring a potentially violent situation to a good resolve. And I'm fine with that. I have no problem explaining those away, which I did at the times that they occurred, and I felt fine with them. And most of those incidents, I would have been completely justified and legally safe with using deadly force, but I just made the choice to do otherwise. So again, it's a personal choice, and I can't and wouldn't ever expect anyone to do the same because it's my choice. Anyway, back to the call. So the whole point with the chair is, again, I know my capabilities. I know what I'm dealing with. And I know that I have the ability to truly whack this kid across the room without really endangering myself very much based on, the chair, my physical ability, the kid, how I see he's reacting and things that he's doing. And, again, bottom line is that was a risk that I was willing to take for this situation. So as soon as I get that chair in place and I feel like essentially there's a little bit of a lull there, I call dispatch on, and say, hey, here's my predicament, explain what I got going on, basically a standoff. And I asked for another couple officers to give me a hand with things. The one thing is I wanted someone to talk with these parents and find out what was going on. And obviously I couldn't divert my attention away from this kid, whether he decides to act out on himself or come out of there and do something crazy that way, either way. So after the chair's in place and I let dispatch know what's going on, I start talking with this kid, just a calm, soothing, voice. Just trying to keep everything calm for the kid and not get him all jacked up. And, kind of in that same way, I tell him exactly what's going to happen, depending on what he does or doesn't do. So, again, I reiterate the fact that, if you come at me, you're probably not going to get 2 steps off the bed and you're going to get whacked across the room with the chair. If you do something silly like throw the knife at me, here's what's going to happen. If you start to cut on yourself and or you start to put the knife into a position that I feel, you're going to put the blade into your body, here's what's going to happen. So I kind of give him all of these if this, then that, which is a good thing to do, very clear, make sure we all know what's going on. And again, I keep that firm, that calm tone of voice, make sure that he understands that I'm the person in charge here. But I reiterate over and over, hey, if you don't do anything stupid, we're just going to keep talking and eventually we'll get things worked out. Everything's going to be okay. So at one point, the mother comes over to me, kind of, behind me and to the side, again, really just bored with the whole thing. And she asks me, she says, well, how much longer is this going to take? And I'm thinking, what in the hell is wrong with you? It just didn't compute to me. And well, it still doesn't, but she's still more concerned with my being in there and essentially interrupting the dinner that she's trying to cook than she is with the safety and the well-being of this kid. Yeah, it was just weird, just very strange. And, I shoo her away and essentially say, hey, there's another cop or two that'll be at the door anytime. I need help with this. So she kind of gives me a roll of her eyes and she goes away. And now I'm kind of starting to see, well, gosh, I see what part of the issue, if not more than part of the issue, is here with this kid now. So as I'm waiting for the kid again, I'm talking to him, or I'm waiting for my help. I'm talking to the kid and I'm asking him, what's wrong? Anything that it is, it's not worth dying for, and everything will work out. And, I'm just trying to say all the things that I can try to think of that to help alleviate this kid's anxiety and talk him down and help him not think that he needs to end his life, basically. Well, from what I remember, he's just a typical teenager with typical teen problems. There wasn't anything major that popped out at me other than the ambivalence of his parents, it seemed like. But, there's something with a school issue. There's something with the parents, again, that he said, and again, saw it. There was some feeling sorry for himself. I think a lot of that is pretty common with folks that are thinking about taking their lives. A lot of times they feel sorry for themselves and they just don't think that they want to continue to feel this pain of life that, the reality is every single person in life feels the pain of life at some point, some more than others, but it is there. They don't want to work through things and on and on. So I keep talking with him, and all the while I'm watching his body language. I'm watching his facial expressions. I'm watching, kind of where his feet are placed, if it's relaxed or if he's enabling himself to essentially jump off of that bed and try to do something stupid. So there's a couple of points he'd kind of point the knife at me, like, it's sort of a threat to stay back. I'm thinking that I was going to try to do anything, but it's maybe a little bit more theatrical than anything. But, it doesn't matter because, again, I can't read this kid's mind. And every time that would happen, I would just in a calm but sure voice say, you know what, if you come anywhere near me with that knife, you're going to be knocked out on the floor and you're probably going to be in a lot of pain with some broken bones. So, this goes back and forth for a few minutes until there's a couple other officers show up. The first one that gets there, I kind of say, hey, I kind of got this, and there's really no room or nothing else that can be done at this point yet. But go talk to the parents, find out anything you can. And, by then I'd established a fairly good rapport with the kid. I think he's getting pretty close to, accepting the fact that this is a bad idea and putting the knife down and coming out and taking advantage of the help that we have to offer him. So, imagine that. I establish a good rapport with a teenager that I've never seen before by just being honest, acting like an adult, and explaining consequences of their actions in a clear and calm fashion. So finally he does. He finally does. He puts the knife down, stands up, kind of follows the things I'm telling him to do. He walks over to the doorway. I make sure that he doesn't have any other weapons with him or, in a pocket or anything that's some big trick, but he's fine that way as well. And then we get him outside and we talk to him and we start talking about how we're going to get him some help with a mental health professional to help him deal with his issues. And all this is that, the parents are kind of standing there. They're talking to the other cops, but they're definitely making no effort to hide their displeasure and their impatience with the fact that this whole thing is unfolding in their apartment. And then at one point, I believe it was the mom, because the dad didn't hardly say anything, but at one point, it's kind of like they could sense our frustration. We were getting pretty irritated with the fact that they just didn't seem to be given much of a damn about their own kid. No compassion or care. And the mom says, well, he's done this before and he's only looking for attention. And I get that. They understand that is part of it, just like I discussed. But the problem is that there's obviously a lot more going on here, and they, whether they want to admit it or not, or whether they even realize that they're contributing to some bigger issue that this kid's having. That doesn't do anything to basically help us understand their side. We're still irritated with them, and I'll say now, obviously there's some crappy parenting skills going on. Well, I can say that call ended well. We kept a kid from killing himself, kept a kid from killing anybody else, kept a kid from getting shot or hurt or anything else. Everything kind of played out well and ended up resolving. And we got him some mental health help through some programs that are available through the city. I never went back, never heard or saw his name in any reports or any EIs or exceptional incidents, as we call them, of, whenever there's like a fatality or suicide or an exceptional incident, so that cops can kind of keep up of what's going on in the city. So, I can only hope that this kid came out okay, or at least that's the hope that I want to keep in my mind. We did make it, as much as we could, we made it as crystal clear to the parents that they were obviously contributing to his problem. We did it as well as we could without getting a citizen's complaint out of it. So I think we did well there as well. Well, my squad sergeant was also out there. I think he was the third person, and kind of saw how things unfolded. And then later on, obviously, we talked about it and discussed pros and cons. And, you debrief things like that. We debriefed it in our briefing the next day before our shift as well, because you learn from things like this. He and the other couple officers that were out there were pretty happy with the way things unfolded and impressed with how I had dealt with it. So I ended up getting a commendation for it, which is cool. I mean, I still look at it as I was just doing my job and trying to, keep everybody safe and keep from having to shoot this kid most of all. But so anyway, that was cool. Suicide is a big problem in our country, especially for the younger population. And then you start talking about vets, public safety. A lot of people, unfortunately, they just have troubles dealing with the problems in their lives, and they feel that suicide is the solution. And you always want to encourage anyone with an issue like that to seek help, or if anyone comes to you for help, please don't disregard it. Take it seriously and help any way that you can. And there's a lot of programs out there now that you can send people to, and there's, phone lines, hotlines that you can call. There's a lot of things that you can do. And to you, the reasons may seem trivial, breaking up with a girlfriend, or, if you're a rich kid and you get your allowance cut off, or et cetera. I don't know. Or, it could be something serious like, a divorce or a death of a child, or being diagnosed with a terminal disease, or, having done time in combat with the military, blah, 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 where you say, holy crap, I may consider the same thing if it was me. But really, the bottom line is it doesn't matter what you think or what you feel. It truly only matters what the person's state of mind is and how they think and feel about those issues. Because we're not really as worried about what the cause is as what the effect is, and the fact that these people are almost willing to take their lives over it. And closely tied with suicide and threats of suicide is mental health. And I'm sure we'll go into it at some point later and belabor it. But, there is kind of a main point that I do want to make now. It's not illegal to be crazy. It's a little blunt. It's probably not real PC anymore, but that is the truth. It is not illegal. It's not a crime to be crazy. Whether it's, self-medication issues or over-medication issues or just flat having mental health issues, not illegal. Law enforcement is continuously forced into taking care of situations involving mental health issues day after day after day, and it is really difficult and sometimes ends up resulting in injury and or litigation over, again, something that is not a crime. But the mental health thing has fallen into our lap, and there really is no one else that can deal with it. Mental health calls and mental health petitions, which is where we are forced to basically go find somebody and then transport them to a mental health facility, sometimes against their will. Hate those calls. Absolutely hated them. I hated them not only for myself, but for my people when I was a patrol supervisor. And sometimes for SWAT, we would have to go undercover and try to find these people because it was just that bad. Again, hate those calls. I hate that we have to deal with them, but it's fallen into our lap. And again, we'll probably get into this mental health stuff another time. So again, at least this call had a happy ending, however short that it may have been. And like a lot of calls, I just try to believe that we made a difference in this kid's life and that the people involved ended up okay. So with that, I close this episode of I Barely Got Here. Thank you for listening. And if you like the show, please subscribe, post a review, and tell your friends to give it a listen. If you have a question or comment, shoot me an email at ibarelygothehere@gmail.com. And you can follow the podcast on Instagram and Facebook. Sam42 is 107.